I've been beavering away for the last really 2 years, but especially in the last year on a new book, which is going to really look at the paranormal in a very direct way. And we've spoken before. That's been a big part of my life, researching that. But one of the things that's always struck me is how many very ordinary, normal people have had paranormal experiences, as in beyond the normal, whatever the cause. I give a lot of lectures and meet a lot of people, and I've been doing this for over 30 years. And I suddenly realized there is such a rich tapestry here of things that I've been told, people's experiences that they've shared with me. And I thought, you know what? This needs to be written down for posterity. And when you thread them all together, you realize that the big picture emerges that this kind of stuff's going on all the time, somewhere to somebody. Not every day to all of us, be quite fun if it was, but enough that when you start to look at it all, you realize, okay, this needs addressing. And yet we live in a world where it gets dismissed, gets laughed at, or indeed attacked. And we're told all these people are mad and all the usual things. And I just don't believe that to be the case. And I think there are some cases that certainly need looking at properly. So I've been compiling a lot of that and trying to then put into that a narrative that says, okay, rather than just say, let's look at what the skeptical explanation could be, which seems to be the normal thing. Let's put that aside and say, what if the skeptics are wrong? Let's look at what the non-skeptical explanations might be. And from there, it becomes really quite fun. You begin to explore, well, there very well is likely a whole other universe out there that we haven't understood. So, in the end, I concluded that all these things were very strange. And the book is called Strange, subtitled Paranormal Realities in the Everyday World, which kind of sums it up, really. It's going to be out in July. But so that's really been the main project, and I hope it would do good. I think that it will give voice to people who've not been given a voice to for a long time.
Not
And
to give
some,
anything away. Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Not to
oh,
give
that's
anything
right.
away in the book, what are some of the main topics that you're gonna be covering in this book that people can get excited about?
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank you all for tuning in. If you're enjoying this episode and want to help us uncover more mysteries of the universe, don't forget to support Curious Dimension. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the like button. It really helps get this content in front of more people who are curious just like you. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to click that notification bell too, so you're the first to know when we release new content. For those of you listening on your favorite podcast platform, make sure to follow or subscribe to the show and leave us a rating and review. It helps more than you know. And whether you're watching or listening, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below or send me a message. Thanks for being part of the Curious Dimension community. Your support keeps this journey going.
Sure. Oh, I don't mind giving away a few things. Yeah, you got to go with the obvious. And I start with a list of probably the most recorded paranormal phenomena that I hear about. And if you were going to put the list together, number one is ghosts, questionably, and then by default poltergeists. But there's different kinds of ghosts, and so I split it up a little bit. And after an introductory chapter, which kind of lays out, look, this is what I'm trying to do here, I start to look at really, in a way, the most sort of prevalent things that get recorded. People meeting relatives or having conversations with friends, often when they didn't even know they'd just died and the
Mm.
friends turned up at the house or whatever. You'd be amazed how often that happens. And I know what people say, oh, it's all in the mind. Why would you imagine that? Because often these people don't even know that the person's just died. And
Right.
one recurring phenomenon is it seems to be almost at the moment of death that people have a little grace time to go and tie up a few loose ends. And it's funny how often they'll go and meet a relative and maybe just turn up at the door, and the relative will think, why are they here? Not knowing that at that very moment, they're actually slipping away into another dimension. So that goes on a lot. And of course, there's a lot of expressions of that. People, especially children, who've seen lost relatives or ancestors that they never met. And that is another really interesting phenomenon. So they'll say, this man keeps coming into my bedroom at night. He seems very friendly, but I don't know who he is. And then when the child describes them, very often the parents will know who she's describing or he's describing. And they'll get a book of old photographs out and say, do you mean this person? And the kid will go, yes, that's them. And it's not necessarily anybody the child ever met, but it's almost like the ancestors are checking in just to see how their descendants are doing. It's really fascinating. And I know how crazy this can all sound, but I've come to the conclusion there's something to this. So there's that. And then I explore more regular ghosts, and a lot of it's positive. And I'm very keen to point this out because I think the paranormal often gets over spookified. And I'm trying to pull back from that. So the publishers are Watkins. It's going to be out across the English-speaking world in July, and they're very good. And I said, please don't put a spooky cover on the front. I don't mind it being mysterious, but don't do the classic evil light coming through the trees thing, because I'm trying to get away from that. And they were very good, and they've come up with, I think, a really strong cover that doesn't do that, but it still says, okay, this is mysterious and should be looked at. And then, of course, the book then goes on to look at out-of-body experiences, psychic phenomena of many kinds, and you got to do it, UFOs.
It's intimately intertwined to that conversation.
It totally is. And I think, interestingly, there's much more of a recognition of that now, that UFOs aren't just nuts and bolts things over there. Yeah, they're entwined with multidimensional realities and psychic phenomena and everything that entails. And, of course, crop circles come into it as well, because I've met so many people over the years with quite extraordinary tales to tell, and some I've already told, and I didn't want to retread old ground, but there's a few that I hadn't recorded, and so there's a lot of that in there. And then the book really culminates in any bizarre experience that I cannot categorize, but I think should be related, like a lady whose car suddenly flew up into the air one evening, and then looking at the future of all this, and looking at, look, we're entering a world where AI clearly is now taking off so quickly. Where's that going to lead? And there's good and bad to that, obviously.
Yeah.
The bad is it'll probably end the world and we won't have any jobs, but okay. But the good might be that it will give us data processing facilities that I don't think we've ever really had before. And I like to think that if you start to get it to look sensibly without boundaries at the paranormal, AI might itself conclude, actually, there's something here. You should all be looking at this. And so I talk about that. And so it does build. The book isn't just a series of unrelated encounters. It builds a narrative. And hopefully at the other end, you'll be feeling that it's worth exploring the world again in a whole new way.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that because, like you said, like the UFO phenomenon it's definitely connected to all of these other sort of paranormal things. The ghost phenomenon is something I know plenty of people that claim to have had encounters with things that were there but weren't really there, and paranormal activities happening in their house. I personally have never experienced anything like that. I'm deeply curious about this, and I have close friends and family that I respect and know, and they're not lying to me. That's for sure.
No.
And there's other strange accounts of this sort of phenomena happening, and I come to the conclusion, or at least bought into the idea, that it's all connected somehow. Obviously, there's bifurcations and aspects of them, but this all seems to be connected to our collective unconscious or some other sort of thing that's elusive, but undeniably there. And I love it when people are pursuing that. And I don't think anyone's ever going to get to the heart of what that is, but it's a pursuit that I think people need to start taking a closer look at. And that's one of the things I think you're doing.
Definitely. And I think because I get annoyed by blanket skepticism. And I don't get me wrong, skepticism has its place, and sometimes they will come up with an explanation that is possible for certain things. But then there's a category where really that doesn't fit. I'll just give one example where more than one person sees the ghost at the same time. Because they'll always say it's a trick of the mind, it's some kind of hallucinatory effect. I've met so many people that have seen exactly the same thing at the same time. How are they having a shared hallucination? And you could maybe once, twice, but then I've met so many people that you think, no, actually, this is happening on a regular basis, or groups of people witness stuff like this. So it needs to be talked about, and we need to just put aside the scientism that blocks proper investigation of that. We're living in a new world all around at the moment, but I think we need to look again at this because if you are to acknowledge the fact that, look, there is a multidimensional reality here, and actually work from there rather than no, there isn't, I think you're going to open a whole much more fascinating universe. And how many times do we hear scientists saying we haven't understood things correctly? We've just made new discovery and we've got to reevaluate, which is great, but they won't seem to do that when it comes to looking at the paranormal. And yet, a lot of what they're dealing with, and in the quantum world especially, I think absolutely ties into multidimensionality. Yeah, so we say aliens, UFOs, ghosts, like they're separate categories. But as I point out in the book, and as you've pointed out there, they're probably not. There are other realities and they intersect, and sometimes they'll cross over, and some people will witness that. Some more than others. It sounds like you haven't, but your time might yet come. I have. And it's funny because I thought I've not had that much happen to me in my life, but I will record in the book the things that I've had because that then has made me more open-minded towards other people. And actually, by the end, I thought, actually, I've had quite a few things that are really quite bizarre. It's funny when you look again at things you took for granted at the time, perhaps you begin to realize that many of us are having these kinds of experiences, albeit not as overt as some would, but we blank them out. We say,
Mhm.
oh, well, that was probably something, and you don't think about it because it's almost like we don't want to go there. But going there, I think, is a really fascinating thing to do.
Yeah, and I guess I'll backtrack a little bit. So I've had some things that I have found a bit bizarre, but I always seem to put it in the bucket of a rational explanation. And of course, I've had these conversations with people that are highly exposed to anomalous things. And they have told me that they're like, I wouldn't discount that because there may actually be something there that the way your mind works may not accept that at all. And so I think that's a cultural thing. I'm not saying I've had a paranormal experience and I'm writing it off. I'm saying that probably people have had more paranormal experiences than they're aware of. And because
Yes,
of cultural ideologies and maybe food, and because our civilization here in the West is so technologically advanced, we may be dulling down some of these senses that are quite innate in us to perceive these things. And so the rational mind may just be discounting this all the time. And we may be bombarded with this type of information a little bit more often than we realize or can notice. I want to
yes,
get to your new speaking engagement on making sense of secret agendas and conspiracies and cover ups. But one thing I want to touch on before we get to that is crop circle researchers, I think, are pretty acutely aware of some sort of psionic, collective unconscious, psychic connection between the paranormal. And for the longest time, I don't think that was accepted at all. And now we hear whistleblower like Jake Barber talking about this more. Now this is getting a little traction. I want to see if you could talk about that aspect of it a little bit because you obviously researched the crop circle phenomenon and had a probably
sure.
pretty intimate knowledge of that. Can you talk to us a little bit about the paranormal and the psychic, psionic component?
Isn't it interesting that we can just use the word psionic here and
Right.
assume everyone now knows what that means? But that in itself is a really telling sign because you would have said that 5 years ago. Most people wouldn't know what you meant. Now it's been talked about so much, especially in the UAP stroke UFO world, that it's becoming seen almost as a key component. We know there's people like Chris Bledsoe who claims that he can attract UFOs using a spiritual force, and there's other people that have found that kind of interaction as well. And I can't remember whether we spoke about this last time. So if we did, forgive me, but I know from my own work that a group of us did here in Southeast England back in the 1990s that there is an interactive quality with all of these things. Just to cut a longer story short, but it is referred to in the new book, Strange, and I have written about it in the past. We did a series of experiments to see if we could interact with whatever was creating crop circles. And we were open minded about that. We worked with psychics and channelers and tried initially to try to get a rendezvous going with being able to stand there and watch a crop circle being formed. That's how it began. And we thought if we can get them to agree to come here, we'll see this marvelous thing that so many people want to see, but very few have. That's how it began. As it went on, though, it took us off into a different track. And what we discovered was all the way along, every time we tried to arrange something new, we might not get the overt result that we wanted, but you would get so many other utterly bizarre coincidences that it did feel like something actually was responding. I'll just give you one good example. So this would have been in 1993, I think, when we first decided we're going to start these experiments up. And we had a meeting at the house of a man called Paul Bura, who no longer is with us, sadly, but he was a very good psychic and somebody we trusted and indeed loved. And we gathered at his house and we had to keep it very secret what we wanted to do because we knew otherwise you're going to get tricksters trying to mess it up.
Outside influence.
Exactly. So it was very hush. On the very morning that we met at Paul's house that day, the first crop circle of the season in our part of the world appeared in the field as close as you could get to Paul's house. Now, you think, okay, what are the odds
Maybe.
of that? But could be coincidence, so you write that one off, but it's interesting. But then things like that started to happen. We'd go out and do an experiment and we didn't see anything happen. Then you'd find a formation that appeared a little bit further down the road that had symbolism that seemed to tie in what you were doing. It was almost like they're saying, no, you're not ready yet. You're not ready yet. But we'll just give you this little clue. And then the other thing we found was that many of us in the group, started to see balls of light. So if you read Elizondo's claims, I can completely believe that because he sees these pale green orbs appearing in his home. That is exactly what I saw with one of the other guys and another chap in a well-known crop circle place called Alton Barnes. We saw exactly that pale green luminescent balls of light flying over a field that had a crop circle in it. And then another team member, Michael Barry Reynolds, also saw a ball of light. And then we all, and it's all documented before now, began to see one by one more and more of these things that we'd never seen before. And you think, why suddenly are we seeing them? And it seemed that the more that we gave towards this, what you might now call psionic experiment, the more it gave back. And I'll cut a long story short here, but we had a series of channelings. And we had one very interesting one. And you can think what you want about it, even if you think it's a load of rubbish. I think the information is not necessarily valueless because it's coming from somewhere. And whether it's coming from Paul or from the Syrian High Council or whatever it is, I think we thought, let's just go with it and see what it says. And we gathered up on top of an old Iron Age hill fort, not so far from where we live here, on a beautiful summer's day in 1994. And we were saying, look, we're getting all these incredible things happening, but we're frustrated. We need a little bit more. We want to get the result we were looking for. And we then got a message that we didn't expect, which was, look, stop looking at it like that. What you're trying to do is show to the world how clever you are and prove it. And you know what? Even if you get the evidence you're looking for, they're not going to believe you. And it was like, oh, the message in essence, and it was far more eloquent than this, was, look, do it for yourselves. Stop trying to do it to prove to other people X, Y, or Z. Do it for your own satisfaction because it's right to do it. And we all were taken aback by that. And you know what, though? I don't think I've ever looked back in my life since then. I realized, yeah, what did we think? We were going to get this film of a crop circle appearing and we'd all be celebs.
Be
I don't know.
famous.
Yeah. And actually, all that would have happened, and we know this from the Oliver's Castle video, where allegedly a guy maybe filmed a crop circle filming. We know what happens. Just nothing but controversy and doubt and attacks. And that's probably what we would have got. And that was a really interesting lesson. And then the last year of work we did, 95 into a little bit of 96, we took a totally new tack. We thought, forget videoing it, forget trying to show the world. Let's just see the interaction's been working. Let's just see if we can just take that to the next degree. So we decided, let's influence a crop circle in exactly the pattern that we want. Now, I'm saying that like it was straightforward. It wasn't. We divined notes of music and sound. Or, yeah, there were lots of things that we thought we had to do. And finally, we sat up on another hillside one beautiful but cold summer's evening, and we had by then a shape that we thought might appear from this experiment that we were doing, and that it would contain at least 6 circular elements. So we sat up there on a hillside playing these weird notes of music and having very strange looks from people walking by. And as far as we're aware, that very night, exactly that shape occurred as a crop circle. Now,
But not where you were, right? Where you,
wasn't where we were, and we never expected that. But interestingly, it was on a direct line from where we were, connected with other sites we'd been working with. And it was an old crop circle site we'd had before, but some miles north of where we were. And there it was. And it was just perfect as a formation. And it was literally 6 circular elements in a row, ring, double ring, single circle. And of course, it was like, whoa, okay. It was almost like the final signing off of, well done, you did it. You didn't film it, but that's fine. Maybe we don't want you to film it, but you got it. And I think that did. It left us thinking, you know what, that's good enough. And I learned that lesson, even though I'm writing a book now, trying to put it out there to show the world that, look, this stuff is real. Equally, I'm not trying to hit people around the head with it. If you don't want to believe in it, well, fine, don't read the book. But I'm offering it. And that changed all of us, I think, especially the way I gave talks and things like that. I just offer it. If you want to reject it, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to have an argument with you, but this is what I've learned. And that was really important. And of course, even then, we had skeptics saying, oh, people found out what shape you'd chosen and they went out and made it for you that night. Or you made it, didn't you? We didn't. God, if I could
Right.
make crop circles that way, I'd go out and make a lot more. It was so beautifully done. All we can say is there's no evidence that happened. And even if somebody had psychically divined what shape we'd come up with and gone out and manually made it, that's still quite amazing because you still interacted on the wider mental internet, if you like. Therefore, when I hear people talking about psionic interaction with lights and UFOs and indeed crop circles, I'm really open to it. Because certainly we discovered, yeah, there is something here. And okay, I can't exactly say what happened other than it seemed to work. And there were just too many things that were way beyond coincidence that have never really been explained. Yeah, so therefore, isn't it interesting we're now in a world where everybody is putting all these previously disparate things together and saying, all right, the universe doesn't work the way we thought, which I think is very exciting.
Yeah, I think that's very exciting. And I think that's one of the main points of a lot of these topics is it gets you thinking differently, pulls you out of your linear Newtonian version of the universe and starts mixing in quantum mechanics with an exciting new view of what's going on. And we're just starting to peel back those layers. And these topics are that gateway drug, if you like, to getting us to look in a different area. We've been shining the light in one corner of the room, I think, for quite a while now. And I think it's time to start shining it in some different areas. And that's one of the things these paranormal experiences and phenomena teach us. It's, hey, you guys aren't, okay, you guys learned this. That's good. You got this sorted out. Now let's mix up the bag again and let's look in a new direction because you guys are going too far down one path. That's not going to be the whole picture. So many questions I have for you, Andy. One of the things I wanted to ask you is you mentioned using mediums and psychics in your sort of experimentation. There's 2 names I wanted to throw out to you, and I'm not sure if you're aware of these names. I bet you are. One name is Elizabeth Kingston, and the other one is Barbara Hand Clow. I'm not sure if you're
I
familiar.
assume you mean Isabel Kingston.
I'm sorry, Isabel Kingston.
Yeah,
Yes, I
I assume,
apologize.
yeah.
Yes, yes.
Who I believe has passed away, or am I wrong?
I don't know. I knew about her just through Freddie Silva's book, Secrets in the Field.
Sure. Yeah.
And I believe he knew her and they had worked together a little bit. And I had only found one interview of her at all on the entire, I scoured because I thought it was very interesting, his story. And, but did you ever cross paths with Isabel Kingston?
Did, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I met Isabel on a number of occasions. I wouldn't say I was a friend, but we interacted quite happily, and she was a very interesting person. She was one of those kind of characters who was very prominent on the scene as filling in the psychic part of crop circle research and was respected. What I would say is if you want to track down what she said and what she thought, and they are available on various websites, the old crop circle journals contain various articles either about her or by her. She is in the record, but of course, this was pre-YouTube. There wasn't a lot of
Right.
videoing going on then, a little bit, like you say, but there are written records of what she got up to. And
Hmm.
anybody digs out old issues of what was called the Circular, which used to be the Center for Crop Circle Studies magazine, or the Seriologist.
Let me write those down. The Circular.
The Circular and the Seriologist, or Seriologist, they changed its name at one point. There you will find definitely references to her. They are online somewhere. I know a number of places have scanned them all. And I myself, with Barry Reynolds, we're currently working on a project to try to scan a lot of stuff with permission that is not in the electronic record. It's all on paper. And the sadness is there's so much rich evidence in there that has never made it onto the internet. And I know everybody thinks, oh, everything there is to know is on the internet. Well, I can tell you it is. And so much of that earlier crop circle research is lost at the moment until it can be made available again. But I'm pleased to see it is trickling out there, but you've got to know where to look. And I think that there's a lesson there, because I think you do have the kind of the post-internet world that seems to only know what it knows. And I see a lot now, and it's not really a criticism, but an observation in the crop circle world of people saying, wow, has anybody ever thought this before? And they put forward an idea, and you go, yes. They were saying that in 1992.
In this topic, right?
So and I recognise it's not fair to criticise, but you think, isn't it sad that they haven't found that because it's not out there? If it was all out there more available, they'd be able to then cross-reference what they're quite rightly observing now with what has gone before, and then we begin to get the bigger picture a bit better. But yeah, Isabel was, I think, a fascinating character. Say, I think she's passed away. If you haven't, Isabel, forgive me. But even if you have, you're probably listening anyway.
I asked Freddie Silva this question maybe about 5 or 6 months ago because I was trying to track her down. And he did tell me that she was still alive, but living somewhere away and not really involved in these topics anymore. So I just stopped pursuing it at that point. So she may still be with us.
She may. As for Barbara Hand Clout, I never met her. I did try to get her as a speaker at our Glastonbury Symposium conference one year, but it never worked out. But yeah, she obviously was somebody with a lot of influence. She put a lot of stuff out there about the bigger picture of what was going on. And I believe still has a pretty strong following out there. But I never had any personal interaction with her.
Okay. So she's I've had a couple of email exchanges with her, and I'm hoping to get her on the podcast. She has a very interesting story. She's very well respected in the sort of the new age space, but she does a lot of the great work with tying in scientific data into the sort of collective unconscious and the paranormal aspect of channeling and psychic phenomena. But one thing she allegedly did, which I find utterly fascinating, but not something that hasn't happened before. I think 2 days before the Barbary Castle tetrahedron crop circle I have in the picture behind me, 2 days, I think, 24, 48 hours before that came down was reported, she drew that on a piece of paper. And it wasn't like close to it. It was very accurate of what that crop circle was. And I find that type of phenomenon really interesting. And it's not the only example of that. Like, you and the group of people you were working with back in the 90s were actively pursuing that sort of phenomenon. And could it be called upon? Could it be interacted with? And so I find these stories so interesting because time, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to be a factor. And it's obvious. That's one of the points of all this is, hey, just because you think you're causing something at this time, that's not necessarily true. Time isn't what we think it is. And that's an integral part of quantum physics and I think our reality. And maybe we're starting to wake up a little bit more to that idea. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say about that.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. And certainly Barbara would not have been the only person to have done that either. Various groups, I've just given one example of what we did, but various groups around Britain especially tried these interactive experiments up in the Midlands, in a county called Kent here, with really fascinating results and with other similar successes. And of course, Stephen Greer claims that he and his group, they were focusing on their logo appearing, which it then did as a crop circle when they were doing their experiments in the 90s. And again, people have accused him of X, Y, and Z, but I'm open to it because I've seen it in my own life, and other people I trust have also had those successes. Or yeah, people drawing something and then they see it appears as a crop circle a few days later. But even a year later, I think it's good enough success. Because as you say, what does time mean in these realms? And it's funny because people look at crop circles today as in a linear fashion. So you see, okay, they progressed from this to this, and then they went to this. And then you see there's peaks and troughs of numbers. And certainly at the moment, it's low. Last year was certainly the quietest year we'd had in many years. But there's another way of looking at it, which is that some people say, oh, it's on the wane. It's no good now, is it? I don't really see it like that. I see it another way. When that initial burst of very complex crop circles, including that one at Barbary Castle behind you there, appeared, that was the first burst of, I think, a calling. And this is just off the top of my head here, speculation, but hey, why not? It's like a lot of people were called, and what the crop circles did was create a forum for a whole debate about the nature of reality that maybe they hadn't had before. And even just the basic arguing about, is it man-made, is it extraterrestrial, natural, whatever, and they still go on. That was the crucible in which so much deeper thinking then began. And I look back now and realize that we see this A to B line, but actually what it was doing was calling people to look again at the world and then put those lessons into action. And I like to hope that in the end, that's what I did. You can keep going with what they call the stamp collecting phase, and that needs to be done. We need to keep records of them. Of course we do. But you then got to decide, what did that mean to you? Where has that taken you on? And I do now see quite a lot of people that got into the world of looking at multidimensionality, spirituality. They came into it through the gateway of crop circles. And now they're doing the work that maybe they were meant to be doing. And now they don't need the crop circles to the same degree. And now we're in a world where people are, albeit we'll see whether it happens or not, but they're hoping for more UFO disclosure. They're openly now seeing whistleblowers of very high caliber saying there is something to all this. Maybe we don't need that many circles anymore because they were the precursor and they built us up. But actually, it takes us back to the beginning again. And now some of the stuff we're seeing, like saying with the psionic qualities and all that, is beginning to make sense in a new context. So I sincerely hope we will continue to get crop circles because they're just lovely and we all enjoy looking at them. But I recognize that probably the impetus to need as many as we once did, whether you think they're alien or man-made, doesn't really matter. It was an expression of something deeper. That now we're in a new phase, and that's not going to be so necessary. What that new phase is going to be, I don't know. But if you're feeling the way that I do at the moment, you just can't help the feeling that you just know the world's about to turn upside down any day now. And already we can see politically, socially, it is to a degree. But I think with AI and I think the potential UFO disclosure, yeah, I think that would change everything. And then what will be interesting is if, whether it's catastrophic disclosure or official disclosure, which of course no one would trust the latter, but I think people would then start to reevaluate things like the crop circles with whole new eyes. And all the information that was gathered, all the work that was done will suddenly come into a whole new context. I certainly hope so. And I don't think any of it will have been wasted.
Yeah, I agree with you. It does seem like the world is about to crack wide open, and these topics are just gaining more and more credibility and legitimate people taking a look at them. I want to talk a little bit about your new kind of speaking that you're doing with making sense of secret agendas, conspiracies, and cover ups. There's a few points in there that I thought were really interesting and pertinent because in the last couple of weeks, they just released about 80,000, give or take, JFK documents onto the internet. And there's a lot of people out there that have been fascinated with this conspiracy. It clearly was a conspiracy. The president was killed. And one of the things you making connections with is with UFOs and the JFK assassination. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I'll just say one more thing. I recently had Ryan Wood on the podcast, he and his father have done a great deal of heavy lifting with the MJ-12 documents, going through an authentication process to see what the likelihood is that there was some of these documents that are real. And there's one document that's been out on the internet forever, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's the one from JFK to McCone, the recently new appointed director at the time. dated about 10 days before his assassination, where he wants all the information on UFOs. And you're familiar with Danny Sheehan?
Yes.
Yeah. So he contends that this sort of tipped off the CIA and other interested parties that he was having back channels with Khrushchev to disarm the nuclear weapons, and that this sort of the UFO topic tipped them off to this. And this was one of the reasons that sparked the plan to execute him. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you see the connection between UFOs and JFK is, and have you heard any of these similar stories?
Sure. I should give some context here. So I'm about to take part rather in an online course, which is open to everybody. And it's a great idea. There's a platform called Truth Matters. Look them up. Truth Matters. And they're trying to gather people together into sort of a supportive community to basically read sections of books all together, all at the same time, then come together. There'll be interactive groups and everybody can discuss. And then you have a Q&A with the author once a month. So I am doing one of these courses. And the first one, it begins on the 30th of April. And therefore, what we'll be doing is going through, in my case, 3 of my books that have covered this time more the conspiracy angle, the secret agendas, the cover-ups, but also with some paranormal stuff in there, because as you just said, it does interact, in fact. And this is still something that's very important because we live in a world where now you could argue like the conspiracy thinking, which was seen as a fringe, weird thing only a few years ago, now is at the forefront. You could argue people like that are helping to run America at the moment. So now everybody's looking at that anew, thinking, okay, we need to get some context on this. And that's what the course is trying to do. So it's going to be a very balanced, very open-minded look at, let's pull this together. What's the history of belief in secret agendas and conspiracies? And put aside all the usual blocks to that and the accusations. What's the core of this? And going right back to that and trying to get really interesting, positive discussions going about what it means and how we can make our way through that world more positively. That's really the idea. And that's what I've written about over the years. That is something that people might be interested to take part in. But through that, you then start to look back at what you wrote. So the first book of mine that I'll be talking about is a book that I was very well known for, certainly a number of years. That was The Truth Agenda. And it was this big, colorful tome that I put together to try to make all this stuff very accessible. And it's just interesting because that was initially written in 2009. Updated versions came out. And even in there, I'm talking there about the JFK and the UFO connection. Because like you say, actually, some of this has been out there for quite a long while. And now it's been rediscovered. That's really good. And new sort of data is coming forward. But it's actually been known for quite a while. Now, proving, of course, that's one of the reasons why they got rid of JFK. It's going to be a hard thing. But isn't it fascinating that at this time where he's building up enemies and he's speaking out against secret societies and he's talking about wanting to reform the Federal Reserve, things like that. He's building up these enemies, probably the mafia too. And then you get that moment where Kennedy seems to think that sharing this information with the Soviets would be a very good thing, or at least a healthier thing for the world. And we're surmising correctly, clearly there were forces there that didn't agree with that. I don't think for a minute that was the only reason they got rid of him. But you put all the pieces together, and it does start to look like he was just becoming extremely inconvenient. And sadly, there's a bit of a lesson there. And I thought it was really fascinating, actually, when we went through the anniversary of his shooting back in 2023. There was suddenly an open discussion of things like there was over here in a lot of TV programs of like how they tampered with Kennedy's body after the shooting. Clearly they did. And you've got people who were present more or less admitting that they did. And they know for a fact the body was tampered with to hide the fact that almost certainly other people were firing bullets. Now, that until that moment was conspiracy theory. You didn't really hear about that on mainstream television, and there it was on mainstream television, which is another sign that there's something has shifted. I mean, believe what you got to believe, but I thought that was really fascinating. And of course, now we've just had the release of the documents. Surprise, literally, the smoking gun isn't there. But then, do we honestly think anybody who was clever enough to pull off that stunt in the first place wouldn't have destroyed all the key evidence a long time ago? And yet, nonetheless, there are things in there, like you've mentioned there, which are still fascinating and begin to give some more clues to things that maybe we weren't so aware of, or like we had glimpses. That I think is where the importance is. There's still people, I think, wading through the new documents now. So on the
Oh, yeah.
surface, it doesn't change that much, but in the detail, it does add a few little layers, I think.
Yeah, it would probably take an individual a month to go through maybe 50 to 100 of those documents. There's 80,000. You can imagine how much time it's going to take to
Yeah.
sift through all this, to put some pieces together. But it won't shock me in the next 24 months if somebody finds more clues and more pieces to that puzzle to make this mosaic come together. But yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to see everything coming together. Like when you zoom out and you look at things changing so rapidly. I can't remember the individual's name, but maybe 15 to 16 years ago, there were certain researchers and certain individuals that always kind of alluded the fact that somewhere in the 2020s, there was going to be massive shifts. And I know that's a broad statement. You could always say there's massive shifts at any point in time, but it does seem that things are really changing right now around these topics. We've had congressional hearings about UFO disclosure, more alternative theories of everything are coming out and getting major play. It's very interesting to watch this all sort of unfold. And you hear certain dates being thrown out of discoveries and changes, like 2027 is the date, 2030 is the date, when there's like sort of this tipping point, or
Yeah.
something comes in from outside the solar system and is a good thing, is a bad thing. And there's all these different sort of narratives being pushed. When you started back in the 90s, your gateway and with the crop circle phenomenon and then looking at other paranormal phenomena, are you completely shocked that some of these topics today are being openly discussed, some on mainstream news? How much of a shift have you seen from when you first got interested in these things?
I think there's been phases. So back in the early 90s, of course, one thing that did make a difference to the mainstream talking about things like this was the X-Files. Unquestionably, the X-Files put out there in a very wide way subjects which had not been that fashionable to talk about. And for a while, there was a window. There were so many magazines out there cashing in, but factual stuff as well. And there was suddenly that window. And then that kind of closed and the cynicism kind of came back and all those sort of journals and that dwindled away again. But around that time, you were saying about dates, and I find this really fascinating. Of course, back in the kind of 93 to 95 onwards era, there was a lot of channeling going around. Again, dates. And it was going to be ascension was coming. The ascended masters would come. The earth would have an axis tilt. There'd be some huge, massive disaster. The good people would all be saved. And I always thought at the time, that seemed a little bit too rosy. And anyway, and then, of course, nothing on the surface seemed to occur. And then that idea kept resurfacing. And then about 10 years ago or so, it was the planet Nibiru that was coming back. And all the old Zachariah Sitchin sort of interpretations of that. And then it all resurfaced. But then when Nibiru, as far as we can see, failed to materialize yet, then again it dies down and the cynicism comes back again. But then you're right. We've seen this recently. Again, now as more dates are coming up. Quite where they're coming from is not clear. I know some of them have come from alleged UAP whistleblowers, but because we don't fully know who they are and what it is they've said in detail, it's hard to be sure. And yeah, and another date's 2032, isn't it? Some, again, tipping point where we're going to find something out or something's going to arrive or the James Webb Telescope spotted something coming here. But what I do feel about that is I'm totally open to the possibility, but I do remember what it was like in the 90s. And we were all thinking it was going to happen any day back then. And there'd be some kind of government admission of aliens being here. And of course, that didn't happen. I think we're much closer to it now. And I think it's because of the caliber of the people who are now coming forward. Post Grush, post Barber, and all of this, and Elizondo, it's getting harder just to say it's a few lone nutters. And is it called The Age of Disclosure? This new documentary, it's supposed to be coming
Yes.
out.
I haven't
That looks
seen it yet. I
really,
don't think it's streaming.
no, It's not yet, but even the trailer looks really fascinating. They've got some pretty
Yes.
high-powered people in that. So I think
Yeah.
if that comes out, I think that could absolutely tip it. But there does seem to be a war in the background between those that want disclosure and those that absolutely do not. But you just can't see that not breaking at some point. But isn't it interesting? What I'm saying
Right.
is we've been here before. So I think there is a repeating pattern, and it could be this is yet another false alarm, but I think it will break open sooner or later. You can't keep everything in the egg forever. And I think when it does break, yeah, I think the world's going to get a whole new look at what it is and who we are. And I think it'll be very disruptive, but probably necessary.
Let me ask you another question. I'm sure this has come across your purview. You're familiar with the new alleged discoveries underneath the Khafre pyramid in Egypt.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jay over at Project Unity. He's interviewed the Italian gentleman. I don't know if you saw it yet, but he actually interviewed the Italian gentleman, Felipe Bonde, and the other guy who's eluding me at the moment, who developed the synthetic aperture radar Doppler effect to look at the apparent structures under Giza. And for anybody who's listening, we're talking about the recent discoveries under the second pyramid, G2, on the Giza Plateau. Allegedly, they've found structures under there using this technology, SARS, synthetic aperture radar Doppler effect, where they can essentially map the underground. And what they're claiming is that some of these structures go down as far as 2 kilometers through the bedrock. And if that's true, and this technology is 100% confirmed, and the people that put this together claim that it's there, that's quite shocking, and that pushes things back, and that absolutely disturbs what we consider the history of humanity. Because if you now have a civilization that not only built the pyramids, which is an out of place artifact in itself, but now you're saying they've dug and gone down to the bedrock 2 kilometers with cylindrical columns. Now you're at like another level. This is very strange, very bizarre. And maybe this discovery, along with some other discoveries that may come about, maybe this is part of the disclosure. It's just who we are and where we came from. And that could tie into the UFO phenomenon. It's not difficult to imagine that at some point in the distant past, a group of humans had some breakthroughs and discovered some things and then went off in another direction and kind of left other people and other groups to do whatever they were doing. And so maybe these discoveries, maybe these things are part of us waking up to who we are, where we came from, and what this bigger narrative is. Have you considered that? Are you familiar with these findings?
Sure. Oh, yeah, again, though, a cycle, because where we are now, and they're looking again at the pyramids and everything, people have been saying for years, there surely is some unknown technology that built those pyramids, even just the bits we see, never mind the
Right.
bits under the ground. And of course, if you said that, you were described by an archaeologist as being a pyramidiot and really derogatory terms like that. But people keep coming back to it because you just feel in your gut, really, they were just tombs knocked up in 4 years, really? With the old tool, and you just know there's something not right about that. And I'm not saying therefore aliens made it, although I don't think you can discount that, but I don't think so. However, yeah, clearly there's something we don't understand. Now, we've had researchers like Andrew Collins, a lot of good early circle research, but then became much more into the world of archaeology. He actually took a group of people under the pyramids, didn't he? And discovered there were various chambers. Now, not quite like what is being claimed now, but nonetheless, we know there are caverns, there are caves under the pyramids. So therefore, it is not impossible that there are structures down there. And with the sounding equipment we've got now, infrared, all the rest of it, you think if there is something there, they're not going to be able to hide that for too much longer. Now,
Right.
I know that these new discoveries, inevitably, they're being attacked by the normal world of archaeology. But we need to factor a few things in there because it gets quite political. So, like in Egypt, Zawi Hawass, who's like very key part of the Egypt sort of archaeology world, he protects it really. He has, I think, and I don't mean this rudely, I think it's just true. He has a nationalistic agenda. He doesn't
Sure.
want to hear that anybody other than the Egyptian people made these incredible things. I understand that.
Of
Because
course.
he doesn't want the world to be looking at them like they were some kind of primitives that they couldn't have built this. So his argument is always, yes, we did. And however, I worry that blinds him to look, maybe there are some things that you cannot explain. And I think that if this story breaks big and it just becomes impossible to deny that there is something under there, because surely other people are going to back this up. It's either there or it isn't. I think people like Hawassi Skinner, they're going to struggle to keep that under wraps. And in the end, they will have to let the world in, because at the moment, it's very like that. It's like, if you say the wrong thing, you're not coming in here, matey. And I understand that. I do. I get it from their point of view. However, at the end of the day, you've got to find out what's going on there. I don't know any more than you do whether these new discoveries will be kosher or not. But at the moment, if the claims are even half right, yeah, it does suggest there's something pretty amazing down there. And it has to be pursued. And we can't allow nationalism to stop that. However sensitive that area is, the truth must out.
Yeah, my suspicion is that's going to be some of these underground things. If that's true, there's probably more all around the planet. We know there's underground things in Derinkuyu, Turkey, all around Göbekli Tepe. Sophisticated tunnels with areas that can house large amounts of people for an extended period of time. And so my suspicion is that we're going to find out that human beings may have been spending some chunks of time underground for whatever reason. And it may have something to do with catastrophism, cataclysms that may have turbulent
Yep.
times that the planet may go through. And so there may be some underground facilities that were meant to house large amounts of people. I wanted to throw one more name at you. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Gary Osborne.
I know the name. I don't know him personally.
Okay. All right. We can talk about something else then. He's done a lot of work. He knows Colin Andrews and Colin Wilson,
And
right?
Wilson, yes.
Yeah. And he's done quite a bit of work on the Giza Plateau. But recently, in the last decade plus, he's turned his attention to the Rendlesham Forest incident, which I'm sure you're fully aware of. And the binary code that was allegedly given to Jim Peniston, who I've had conversations with. Are you familiar with this event? And have you done any deep dives into it?
Sure, yeah. I've been to Rendlesham on one occasion and strolled around there with a guy he's sadly passed away now, called the Barefoot Doctor. He was quite
Mhm.
well known over here for a while, quite an alternative type. And of course, what you see there is a tourist trap now. You don't
Mm.
even actually get to the places where it really happened.
Mm.
There is, if you go there, they've made this craft which they've shoved into the middle of the forest now, but it's not actually in the exact place where it happens. Anything they don't want you to see, don't worry, you're not going to see it. But it's still nice that it's marked. Look, I've met Larry Warren. He's obviously a very controversial figure and all the rest of it. And various different people, Colonel Holt, have changed their story over and over. You don't really know exactly what happened, other than clearly something did happen. And I think to say it was nothing, or the dumbest theory in the world that they saw a lighthouse that have been there every day. And
Orford Ness.
one night they thought it was a UFO. That's the kind of madness that annoys me. However, yeah, clearly something happened.
Yeah.
Getting to the bottom of it and knowing who to believe above another person is, of course, the hardest thing in the world if you weren't there. But yeah, that's another thing that's now being looked at again, as indeed is Roswell. Because now you've got people like David Grush and that saying, okay, this stuff is real. It wasn't a weather balloon, as we all knew, but to hear it now coming out from quite high levels then makes you look at everything again, from Rendlesham to other big cases around the world that have always been dismissed as mass hysteria.
Yeah.
Which is, again, that to me is just not a good enough explanation.
Yeah. The Roswell one, and this will be the last thing I say, and we can wrap this up. But the Roswell one, that one boggles my mind. That's even questioned anymore. I had a conversation and I read Don Schmidt's book, Witness to Roswell, which is if we're talking about a court case here, that's case closed. There's over 600 witnesses to this.
Yes.
You've got people that were at RAF, the Roswell Army Air Force Base there, that testified that this happened. And you've got eyewitnesses, everybody from people that were at RAF to the paperboy down the street saw this thing being hauled off on a lowboy. So that one
Yeah.
always boggles my mind that people say, we're not sure, maybe nothing happened there. Something happened. There's no doubt about it.
It did. If anybody comes onto the course that I've been mentioning, we'll be covering Roswell because that is included in a number of the books that I've read
Good.
that we'll be covering. So we will be going into Roswell. Only last year, I'd never been to Roswell, but last year my wife Helen and I, we went. Actually, to be there, and you can't get to the exact spot, but just to be in that general landscape, it really brings it home to you. And then we met Don Schmidt. He was there at the UFO museum there,
Very
which I have
cool.
to say, because from the outside it looks a bit, okay, touristy, but actually inside, yeah, you've got the odd sort of slightly shonky display, but it's sincere. And you realize, okay, it really takes it seriously. And I came out really quite impressed. And then talking to Don, who I found very fascinating. And now having read his book, I've read the later one, The Roswell Cover Up. Yeah, as you say, that the detail is absolutely beyond question. But
Mhm.
here's the thing. People want to be fooled very often. If you're not into this kind of thing, the notion that aliens might be crashing their spaceships around the world, that's frightening to people. The
Right.
notion that ETs might be here, they don't actually want that because that's quite scary. So
Mm.
when they say it was a weather balloon, all right, it wasn't a weather balloon, it was Project Mogul, but it wasn't a. That's almost a comfort to some people. So although when you look at the detail, all these claims are madness, if you don't look at the detail, you're at a nice safe distance. And one thing I've noticed at talks is that when I show, and I often will, a picture of flying saucer, if I'm talking about general mysteries and then I get to that bit and you put it up on the screen, you can be guaranteed you'll get a ripple of laughter around the room
Mm.
without me having said a thing. And I challenge people on that now. And I say, interesting, isn't it? Why are you laughing? And then they can't really answer that. And they go, I'll tell you why you're laughing, because you've been conditioned to laugh. And it's
Mhm.
true. They've been told for so many years that it isn't serious. And now you tell them about the congressional hearings and you tell them what's going on. There's a really weird feeling passes through the auditorium because they're going, oh, I didn't really know that. Now, if you follow the news, you should, but most people don't. They don't want to know about that kind of thing. They're
No.
just tuned into other things. When you introduce it to them, this gravity comes down. And you can see, even in those short moments, in the pit of their stomach, they're beginning to realize, okay, there's something going on here. And I do think the congressional hearings, especially the 2023 ones with Grush, Fravor, and Ryan Graves, if you watch them, you cannot believe that it's being spoken about in Congress. And I know there's people want to shut it all down and say it's all nonsense still. The fact that was even talked about in that forum, when you tell people that and you say, go and watch it, you can't come out of that and be the same afterwards. We are very deeply conditioned to laugh off all of that. And that's how the Roswell cover up, and to some degrees, Rendlesham, has been able to carry on for that long because there's a willingness of the people not to believe in it because the world's safer like that.
Yeah. I agree with you, Andy. A lot of people just don't want to. Some people don't have the time or the interest to question it and take a look at it. But when you do, the evidence and it's undeniable, in my opinion. But Andy, this was another really fascinating conversation. I want to thank you for your time joining me here and talking about what you've got going on. Once again, tell everybody about your new speaking engagement and when can they get the new book?
For sure. So look, you can either find it on my website from tomorrow. It's not up yet, but it'll be up there from tomorrow. But the online course, you can already look up on the Truth-Matters website, the platform there. They've got a lot of great people doing all kinds of interesting courses. I'm just one of them. And the course goes on for a few months, and it's great. It's a way of building community, and you can be with like-minded people sharing stuff. There'll be a WhatsApp group, and then we'll all have online Q&As once a month, and people can fire anything they want at me and we'll chat. So it's a great idea. It's a way of trying to get this stuff out there with positivity and removing the polarization that is such an issue at the moment, and allowing conversations and seeing what's the history of doubt. Why do people doubt? Why do people think there are secret agendas? What are they? And looking at that really in the eye. And then how do we now live with that? Where do we go? Coming out of it with some positivity. So look up Truth Matters for that. The book is called Strange. It's already up there on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and any place like that, basically. You can pre-order it. You should actually, because you get it priority then, and you'll be guaranteed the lowest price, by the way. So do pre-order. And that will be out in July, hopefully early July. And yeah, it's a way of, again, looking at the world through the eyes of those who are experiencing this stuff, who have realized there is a reality to this, and hearing them out and sharing the stories and then putting a whole new analysis on it. Because we can't just keep saying these are just a few things that happen to weirdos, because it's not. And I should tell you, most of the audiences I address are not alternative types. They're very normal, everyday folk. And that's, to me, key, that I've, by complete chance, been given this incredible cross section of people to talk to who don't know anything about these things. And yet they're telling me about these incredible experiences. The book encapsulates all of that. And again, says, where are we going with this? And there is, of course, a whole chapter there about UAP, UFOs, where that's all going, and putting that into context with what I've heard personally. And yeah, there's the bigger picture is getting bigger by the day. And hopefully Strange will help focus a lot of that.
That's fantastic, Andy. I can't wait to read it. We're going to wrap this up. I want to thank everybody for watching. Thanks to Andy, and we'll catch you guys next time.